watching Dr. Dobbs, TechNetcast.
I think you've done a great job at putting a panel together. Really was irresistible to everyone. And I've interacted with generally everybody on this panel. I've actually been using Koza and Holland's genetic algorithms, which really do work. We have evolution in the machine, and what we evolve are neural nets. And the neural nets actually learn. In this case, we're feeding them all the stock market data. And if they do a good job, they get to survive in the next generation and procreate sexually. That's their reward for making money. And and this is how the algorithm works. And we put this through thousands of generations, and the surviving investors, when they're not procreating, are actually making money in the stock market. So, I'd like to I'll comment on a couple of things that Doug said. The reason that progress in the 21st century is so surprising to people. We'll see if we can psych out the technology here. It's because of the exponential nature of paradigm shift. I like to contrast what I call the intuitive linear view with the historical exponential view. When people think about the future, when they think about 50 years or 100 years from now, they think of 50 or 100 years of progress at the current rate, even if, like all the members of this panel, we've been around long enough to see that paradigm shift is not occurring at a constant rate. In fact, I've plotted this, and you can argue about any of the data points on there, how long did it take for the web to be adopted and so on. But if you look at a very broad exponential view, tens of thousands of years ago, it took us tens of thousands of years to figure out that sharpening both sides of a stone created a sharp edge and a useful tool. 1,000 years ago, paradigm shift only took a few hundred years. In the 19th century, we had paradigm shifts in only a few decades. We now have paradigm shifts in just a few years. It seems hardly a week goes by where I don't hear about some new internet business model. But right now, paradigm shifts are really doubling every 10 years, which means the next 10 years will really be like 20 years. And that paradigm shift rate is very constant. I mean, you can go back to the beginning of technology. In fact, you can go back to the beginning of biological evolution. The first paradigm shifts took billions of years for the first cells to form, and in the Cambrian explosion, paradigm shifts only took a few tens of millions of years. In fact, you see, if you put this on an appropriate exponential graph, that the evolution of technology just continues at exponential, rapidly increasing pace of paradigm shift from biological evolution. Human-created technology is really the cutting edge of evolution on this planet. If we go out sufficiently into the 21st century and follow this progression of the acceleration of paradigm shift, we see that the 21st century is actually about 20,000 years long. We'll make 20,000 years of progress in the 21st century at current rates of progress. And that's why the future is startling. That's why we tend to underestimate what's feasible in the long term. We overestimate what's feasible in the very short term because we tend to leave things out of our plans. But this exponential growth of technology and of the pace of technology is what makes the future surprising. Now, look, I want to start talking about feasibility. I want to leave some time to talk about Bill Joy's concerns. If we have time at the end, I'll talk about consciousness, but that'll probably take 5 minutes, so we may not have time for that. We'll have entities that seem conscious, whether they really are or not. Actually, I think there's no objective way of telling. It's a whole difference between objective and the concepts of objective and subjective. So there I've discussed consciousness. When we consider feasibility of machines that rival at least human intelligence and that will seem conscious, one of the reasons that machines don't seem very conscious, that they don't seem emotional, that they don't get the joke, is because they're still a million times simpler than the human brain. The human brain is an entity that has hundreds of billions, trillions of parts. We haven't really encountered machines of that complexity. when we do these machines, for reasons that I will talk about, will begin to exhibit the kinds of subtle, rich, deep processes that we associate with human intelligence. But let's talk first about just hardware feasibility. And it's not my position that if we have sufficiently fast computers and a sufficient amount of memory that we automatically get human-level intelligence. You might be able to compute your spreadsheet in 2 nanoseconds, but that's not necessarily going to give you the subtlety of human intelligence. But for reasons that I'll talk about, I think the software does not lag the hardware by very much. But if we first consider hardware, Doug showed a progression of Moore's law. Now and one key issue, a very important issue in the 21st century, is how long is that trend going to go on? I was on a panel at Agenda 2000 with some of the Intel leaders, and they estimated that Moore's law will run out of steam in 12 to 18 years. Moore's law states that we're shrinking the size of transistors. They're not quite this big, but every 24 months we can shrink them by 50%, so you can put twice as much stuff on an integrated circuit, and it runs twice as fast because the electrons don't have that far to go. That's actually a quadrupling of the price performance of computing right now every 2 years. And that's going to run out of steam in 12 to 18 years because by that time the key features will only be a few atoms in width. We won't be able to shrink them anymore. What happens then? Is that the end of the exponential growth of computing? And if you think it is, then you have a very different outlook for the 21st century than otherwise. The first thing that I did, and Hans Moravec has done some similar studies, is put computing and calculating devices on an exponential graph, going back substantially before Moore's law, because we didn't have integrated circuits till 1957, we didn't have transistors till 48. And I put 49 famous computers, starting with the electromechanical calculators used in the 1890 census, the first automated census, Turing's machine, which cracked the Nazi Enigma code, the computer in 1956 that CBS used to predict the election of Eisenhower, up until the PC you bought your nephew for Christmas last winter, and put these 49 machines on an exponential graph. And first of all, it showed that the exponential growth of computing goes back at least 100 years. And it goes back through 5 different paradigms. Moore's law is not the first paradigm. It's the 5th paradigm to provide exponential growth of computing. We had electromechanical calculators, relay-based computers, vacuum tubes, discrete transistors, and now integrated circuits. And what we see, and the key issue for the 21st century, is the sigmoid or S-curve versus exponential growth. We see the S-curve, which is things start out exponential and then level off in lots of phenomena. Rabbits in Australia, they grow exponentially, but then they exhaust their resources. And in fact, any of these specific paradigms, and Moore's law is one of them, does reach an asymptote and eventually runs out of steam. But what we see is that paradigm shift, a change in paradigm, occurs right as that leveling off occurs. And there's usually multiple paradigms competing, and they exist before the old paradigm runs out of steam, but the new paradigm has enough momentum to stay in the lead. But as it levels off, these competitive technologies then take off. They were shrinking vacuum tubes, but then they finally couldn't shrink them anymore and maintain the vacuums required, and transistors came along right at the appropriate time. And a transistor is not a small vacuum tube, it's a completely different paradigm. So this suggests that paradigm shift keeps the exponential growth going. I've since done similar studies, and I was going to show some graphs, but 25 minutes it would take too long, so I'll just describe them. But you see similar exponential growth for lots of technological processes. Brain scanning, genome scanning. When the genome project was started 12 years ago, the skeptics said, there's no way you're going to finish this project. At the rates at which we can sequence DNA, it's going to take 10,000 years to finish the project. But in fact, if you look at it, it's an exponential growth. We've been speeding up the speed with which we can sequence a genome, so we're going to finish actually somewhat early. Miniaturization is another exponential trend.